Okay, so I'm going to turn off the lights so you guys can see it better. When I record, what I'm doing is up here is the camera, for those of you guys that are brand new. It's not recording anything from the class. Bella, are you going to type your notes? Is that what you're doing? Okay, thanks. So, the camera's up here, but it's not recording the actual class. It's just recording my voice, and it's pulling everything off the screen. So everything you see up here is going to pop up in the video. One, if you don't come to class, you have the option of watching it, or two, if you're studying for an exam and you know that you're going to have plot on the exam, an awesome way to do that is to go and re-listen to your lectures. Yes, Bella?
If we miss class, like if we have something, how do we make up the warm-up questions?
I will start embedding them in this, or you can come talk to me, or you ask someone in class, or whatever. Okay? So, plot basically is, how it goes. So, there are 5 steps in plot, and everybody should be writing this down. The title of your notes should be plot. Make sure you put today's date on it. Every single plot has 5 steps. You get your introduction or your exposition, and they're the same thing. Get out of your way, Noah. They're the same thing. It's just 2 different words for the exact same thing. Then you have your rising action, your climax, falling action, and then the resolution or denouement. If you want to sound fancy, call it the denouement. When you're finished writing it down, go ahead and put your pencils down so I know you're finished, and then we can move on. When you read, if you look for these sorts of things, if you look for this structure within a reading, it'll help your understanding and comprehension every single time. If you start looking for structure as you read, things will make sense a lot quicker. It's kind of the same way. It's like when you start a puzzle. Anybody ever do puzzles at home? I love to do puzzles. They're fun. You don't just start putting chunks together, right? What do you do first?
Search for the edge pieces.
Right, you search for the edge pieces. You find your frame. This is your frame. Everything is built around these 5 steps. Everybody good? Okay. So your introduction or your exposition. It's your first stage in a typical story. I say typical because not every story starts with an introduction or an exposition, and we'll talk about that at the end. So in your introduction or your exposition, you're going to get all your background information. Who are your characters? How do they relate to one another? Mom, dad, sisters, brothers, best friends, mortal enemies, my nemesis. When does the story take place? What is the setting? Sometimes you might even get your conflict right away. If you're reading a book and it just sort of starts and you have no idea what's going on, no idea who the people are, you're probably not starting in your introduction. I had a student last year who referred to the introduction as the boring part because it's just details, details, details. They're talking about the seasons, flowers, and how old man so-and-so brings in his harvest 2 days early. It's all that stuff. Which, though it might seem a little bit boring in the beginning, it's all very, very important as you work your way through the story or the book. When you start reading stories, when you read novels, these are the sorts of details you want to write down because you don't know who's going to be important as the story progresses. So it's in your best interest to write everything down as it comes to you. Keep character maps, keep maps of what goes on, create summaries of these different sections. How many people take notes when they read their questions? Anybody? MJ does?
If we're told to.
If you're told, okay, if you're told to. That's an honest answer. That's how most people operate at this point. What you should do, especially if you're a struggling reader, is you should always be taking notes when you read. who are your characters, what's going on, find the 5 steps. Does anybody need any more time? Okay. And also remember, some of these sections, I'll give you notes sometimes, there's a lot of information on the slide. If you find that it's taking you longer to write it all out, you can leave space within your notes, and then you can go back to this when I put it up online and finish your notes. That's one of the nice things about this school, so you can take as much or as little time as you need for the assignments. You good, Alexandra? Oh yeah. Okay. You good, Morgan? Mm-hmm. Okay. If I move too quick, just let me know. So, rising action, it's the stage in the plot when things start to get interesting. Your conflict is going to develop here. You might get introduced to the conflict in the introduction, but it's going to start to actually happen in this section. You're going to get complications because when things just work out, stories are boring. When everybody gets what they want, stories are boring. Interesting stories are the stories where people have hardships, where people have to work through obstacles, where characters stand in the way of other characters and prevent them from achieving their goals. Because you as a reader get emotionally invested and you really want to see what happens. You get more tension in this section. The whole idea is, if you think about it, it's kind of like if you had the end of a rope and someone else had the end of the rope, and that other person with the end of the rope is pulling you towards them. That's what this section should do. It should pull you forward through the story. And if the story's not doing that, the author hasn't achieved their purpose. Because that's the author's goal, is to get you from beginning to the end. How can you have an opinion about someone's writing if you haven't finished it? The idea of the rising action is to pull you into that story and get you interested. And usually it's one thing after another. It's not just one thing that happens. It's a whole bunch of stuff.
Do we have to write that down like verbatim?
Nope. Write down the parts that matter. Like, for example, if you're having a hard time figuring out how to take notes, rising action, stage in the plot, conflict develops, let's see, story events build, moves to climax, let's see, conflict arises, tension grows, characters struggle to resolve conflict. You can just chunk it. So you don't have to write it word for word. If you need to write it word for word, you may, but you don't have to. Anybody need more time? So climax is the next one. Climax is, of course, the point when everything's like, aha! It's that moment. It's, when the robber jumps out of the wardrobe, or Nancy Drew figures out the mystery. Like, that's your climax. Everything pulls you to that point, and all of a sudden you feel a sense of relief. Like, oh, okay, that's good. It's just, it's the end of the movie. It's suspenseful, and all of a sudden you realize that the murderer was the little kid down the street. Everything is revealed in your climax. And if you're really paying attention and the story is really, really good, you will literally feel a sense of relaxation after the climax has happened. It's like you can take a breath. So the rising action is one more thing, and you intake that breath through the rising action, and then you don't exhale again until you hit that climax. And then it's like, oh, okay, I'll sit down. And you should have at this point have some level of involvement with the characters. Hopefully. I'm not going to guarantee that everything you read in this class is going to be interesting, because it won't. You won't enjoy everything. You'll enjoy some of the stuff. Hopefully you'll enjoy most of it. But some of it is going to be a drag. And that's just the reality of it. It's the same thing with history. You don't find everything super interesting in history. Some of it's just a drag. That's how education is. particular case, it states at the end that the climax sometimes points towards the resolution or the denouement. Sometimes. Sometimes you can tell from your climax how things are going to end. Sometimes you can't. Because something will happen in falling action that'll sort of negate the climax or make it so the climax doesn't matter anymore. Those are kind of unexpected plot twists. Almost as though you get like a slight rising action in that falling action. Because sometimes it can be a little jagged. It's not as smooth as this. You know, this is a formula. This is something you overlay over a story, and not all stories are exactly this way. Anybody need more time? Morgan? Okay.
So that thing is recording right now?
Yeah. And it recorded you. So whenever you guys talk in class, you know, when you contribute, when you go home and listen to the video again, you continue talking. So it's kind of nice for people who don't come, because then it gives them a sense of coming to class and participating. So. What do you mean? What?
Compliment myself, like go home and smile.
Oh, I know. Jimmy's awesome. He's not almost falling asleep in the back of class. No. You good, Morgan?
Yeah.
All right. So falling action. It should be, once again, it's sort of the rising action in reverse. Like every single time something happens, you should feel less tension within yourself. Post-climax, you take that, you finally get that breath. Falling action, envision it as though you're relaxing more, leaning back farther and farther and farther into that couch. But like it says, the final outcomes are still not resolved in the falling action. Things can still happen. Don't expect to know everything at this point. Don't expect to see how the story is ended. Sometimes this falling action can go on for chapters. Because plots can be incredibly complex. Climax can have many components. And you just have to wait and see how everything comes together in that resolution. This is also an awesome time, like if you're trying to keep yourself interested in something. Does anyone ever make predictions about when they read? Like, it helps, especially if you're reading something for a class that's really boring, or you have like a little bit of interest in it, or you feel your interest is waning. If you start getting yourself involved, like, I wonder what's going to happen next, or I wonder if this character will do, you know, X, Y, or Z. It seems odd, but it will really keep you involved. To get you interested. It's true, actually. It creates that nice little sense of like personal satisfaction. You're like, oh, I knew that one. One of the things that's really, really cool as you get better at literature is you can start to predict things in more complicated ways, because stories, novels, plays, poetry, there's internal structure. Characters have relationships to one another that repeats again and again and again. And as you become a more educated, a more refined reader, you'll start to notice this stuff. And as you notice it, you'll start to see just how intricate these stories are, how much work the author has actually put into it. Because when someone sits down to write, everybody knows, we've all written our papers, we all know how long it takes to write a paper with some semblance of internal structure, because even your papers have internal structure. Everything an author does is purposeful. It has a reason, it has a motivation. They never just sit down the night before, create a story, and call it done. Lots and lots of pre-writing goes into all this stuff. How you doing, Morgan?
I'm done.
Alright. So the very last step, of course, is the resolution or the denouement. And this is when everything comes together. Or, if you're reading a story in a postmodern, like post-1950s, sometimes things don't resolve. and it leaves you with a very unsatisfied feeling. One thing that's inherent to just American culture is like we like to read stories, we like to watch movies, where everything wraps up in the end. It's very formulaic. You completely and totally understand that at the end of the romantic comedy, everything's going to work out and everybody's going to be fine. It's just how we like our literature, how we like our movies, especially our movies. But especially post 1950, most stories don't end that way because most people don't get a happy ending. The reality of life is that most things never resolve themselves.
Like Pearson
Bergeron?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that, you just don't know what kind of ending that is.
I know,
It's like Twilight Zone.
but let's see. I'm trying to think of a good one where you don't really get everything that you want.
Inception.
Right, Inception. You don't get everything that you want. It doesn't work out the way you want it to. Anybody ever read Jane Austen or watch any of the Jane Austen movies like Pride and Prejudice and Sensibility?
I have a sister. That's my excuse.
Well, they're awesome. Like, they're fantastic stories. You know, it's all the same sort of themes and events that goes on in modern day life, even though it's set, you know, in the 1700s. But that author created a world where all of her characters get exactly what they want. So they're awesome books to read because everything turns out happy. Everybody gets married because that's the whole goal, is to get married and find a husband. So everybody gets married and everybody's happy for the rest of their days. But it doesn't always work out like that. And, right, Stephen King. Incredibly unsatisfactory endings every single time. So,
Seriously.
resolution on
What
that's
movie
awful.
is that?
Pardon?
What movie is that?
Stephen King. Oh boy. It's The Shining,
Oh,
Carrie, right? All those endings, they're totally unsatisfactory. You never feel like, oh, okay, it's going to be fine now. You never arrive at a point like that in Stephen King, nor are you content with the way he wraps things up. But anyway, resolution denouement, final unraveling, everything comes together. If you're lucky, you'll get a satisfactory ending, Jimmy. Generally, you don't. So, it doesn't always work this way. You don't always start out with your introduction. You don't always get all your information straight from the beginning. Sometimes, especially in a postmodern world, and we're all living in a postmodern world, it doesn't work that way. So, medias res, in the midst of things. When I say non-linear, what does that mean? Anybody know? My math people? Matt knows? Matt?
Like, it doesn't travel in a straight line.
Exactly. It doesn't travel in a straight line. Most postmodern narratives, they're non-linear. They don't travel in a straight line. They don't have a sense of here's the beginning, here's the middle, here's the end. They're all over the place. You get that through flashbacks. You get that through broken timelines. Like everybody who read The Odyssey freshman year, it doesn't start at the beginning of the story. The story starts when Odysseus has already been out on that boat for quite some time. Like he's got an entire backstory. The Trojan War, getting blown off course. He's got all these adventures that we don't partake in as readers because it's already happened. We started in the midst of things. Forrest Gump, right? He starts on that bench. Sitting on that bench, waiting for a bus. And us as viewers or readers, if you read the book, don't know what's going on. We don't have any background story. Yeah.
Well, in the movie, The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, it jumps around like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that.
Yeah.
That's kind of non-linear.
That's completely non-linear because you start sort of in the middle of where things might have happened, and the first time you watch it, you spend a lot of time going, I don't know what's going on at all. Like we watch that in science fiction for English 4 because it's all about, having your mind erased and what's that like to have a chunk of your mind pulled out and what does that feel like while it's happening. It's pretty crazy, but it's one of those fantastic postmodern movies. But, Forrest Gump, you start on the bench, you don't know why he's on the bench, and through a series of flashbacks, you learn about him, you learn about his life, and ultimately the story brings you back to that bench, and you're like, I know why Forrest is on the bench. It took me 2.5 hours, but I know why he's on the bench now. And have you ever seen Pulp Fiction? Right? You have to watch that movie a couple of times before you really figure out what's going on, and even then, it's like I still watch it and I keep pulling out more details because that's how it's designed. It's also designed to be cryptic, hence the title Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction is badly written fiction, so there's going to be details that are unexplained, and that's just sort of the nature of it. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Is anyone confused? So, what does SWAT look like? Jimmy. Right, like a mouth. So, you've got this bit, and this bit, and this bit, and this bit. Right, Jimmy? Do you agree?
I do agree.
How do I label it, though?
Okay, so like each side's of the mouth.
Whoa!
Oh, you're asking him.
Huh?
Go ahead.
Give me one, and then I'll let Bella give me one.
At the very tip of the mountain is the climax.
Awesome!
Right in the
Alright, Bella, give me one.
Okay, so like the sides of the mountain are rising action and falling action.
Just give me one.
Oh,
Which side is rising
guys,
action?
This side?
What's this side?
yeah. Oh, the left.
Good job. Noah, you got one?
I think so.
Nothing? Okay, Haley, what do you think?
The right side is falling action.
Yeah.
The higher one on this side, the bottom, is the resolution.
Which side? Right or left?
Right.
Right side. Right. Resolution or
Denouement.
denouement.
No.
Okay.
What's the name for?
Denouement?
Denouement.
Yeah, drop the T.
Denouement.
Mont. Yeah, you kind of sort of shove it in the back of your throat.
Denouement. Denouement.
French was false. Okay, I got one more, Alexandra.
The introduction is on the left side right there.
Alright.
Where?
Right there.
Make sure you copy that down on your paper. Especially if you had no idea where the labels went.
You just noticed the papers and something up on the wall. I've been looking at it this entire time and I read it, but I didn't.
You didn't actually associate it and think about it. I'm speaking that way. Who needs more time? Alright. So, to help you better visualize, we're going to watch a movie. For all of you who are visual learners.
Today we're going to be talking about plot. Plot is an important part in developing the story. In fact, it is the story. To help us understand plot, we're going to take a look at the plot map. The plot map maps out each important aspect of the story, including setting and characters, problem, rising action, climax, falling action, and conclusion. Because the plot map looks a lot like a mountain, I like to think about plot as hiking a mountain. It helps me to visualize and remember the important parts of a plot. Here you see a picture of Angel's Landing. This will help us remember what important properties go into a plot. The first important property is setting. Take a look at this picture. How could you describe this setting? Perhaps you'd talk about the red cliffs, or you might give the reader an idea of the cool mountain air that is blowing. Now think about the story that you're creating, and take a minute and see if you can describe the setting of your story. The next important stop on our plot map is characters. Characters are the people that drive the action of a story. It's important to have good character description. Take a moment and look at this picture. How could you describe these characters? Perhaps you might talk about the man in the hat, or the woman sitting next to him. What do they think? How do they feel? Now take a minute and see if you can describe the characters in your own story. Of course, after we've developed our characters, we need to introduce a problem into our story. By having our characters come into contact with problems, it makes our story much more interesting for the reader. Think about this picture that you see here. What problem might this character be encountering? Perhaps he's just climbing a mountain and almost to the top. Or perhaps somebody is chasing him. Maybe he's after something that's in that bag. What kind of problem could this character be facing? Now take a moment and think about your own story and think about the problems that your characters will be facing. After we've introduced our readers to the problem, next comes the important plot element of rising action. Rising action is where our story really starts to get exciting. Things start to happen much more quickly. In this story, this character that you see on the screen might be the character who is chasing the character from the earlier clip. What is he after? Maybe he's after something in that bag, but you can tell how things start to get a lot more exciting as we introduce rising action. Now take a moment and think about your own story and think about what elements of rising action you will include. Finally, at the top of the rising action, we reach our climax. Do you remember the plot map we looked at earlier? Climax was the very top of the mountain. This is where the most exciting part of the story happens. It's where everything builds and reaches its top. Think about this story that we've been talking about. What might be the climax here? Perhaps that man finally catches up to the man he's chasing here at the top. Now think about your story. What is going to be the most exciting part or the climax of your story? Finally, after our story has reached its climax, we introduce the plot element of falling action. Falling action is opposite of rising action. Rather than build to a climax like rising action did, falling action leads us to our conclusion. Things are still exciting, but they're starting to wind down. In this story, perhaps falling action might include the reader learning that the man who was chasing the man in the backpack wasn't really trying to hurt him. Think about your falling action in your story. How will it lead to your conclusion? Finally, the last element in our story is the plot element of conclusion. The conclusion is where things usually wind down for our reader and for our story. Things begin to make sense. For instance, in this story, perhaps we find out that the man in the backpack who seemed to be being chased actually had something dangerous in the backpack that the man who was chasing him was trying to save him from. Conclusions don't always answer every question, but they often give the reader a final ending to the story. Now think about your conclusion in your story. Think about how it will end. You should now have a pretty good idea of the elements that go into making a great story. Let's take one last look at the plot map and make sure we understand. Each story should have a setting and characters, problem, rising action, climax, falling action, and what this plot map calls a denouement, we're calling a conclusion. Now think about your own story. Are each of these elements represented? If so, you're on your way to having a pretty great story.